Lineup of music. Start with the Timothy Supreme Choir. That's the Boston Public Schools that we're all proud of. But don't you think it's time? We heard from the boss. Bill Clinton. And while we're at it, let's bring on one of the President's favorite bandmates, our junior senator, Senator John Kerry. Throughout the 1996 campaign, we've heard a lot of rhetoric from the other side. We've heard them talk about family values, safer streets, health care, and economic security. But what's been lost in all of the rhetoric of the Republican campaign are the people. The son who needs to stay home to take care of a sick parent. The mother who worries about the safety of her kids as they go off to school every morning. The senior citizen who rely on Social Security and Medicare to help them lead healthier lives. And the working people who are trying to buy a home, raise a family, and send their kids to college. All of these people have a friend in the White House, and his name is Bill Clinton. In the Senate, they have a great friend, a real friend, too, like our current and future Senator John Kerry. And tonight it's my pleasure to introduce someone who has championed the cause of working families throughout his career. A senator who just keeps getting better on health care, on education, on the minimum wage, on so many issues. A real friend to Boston and to Massachusetts. Let's welcome our senior senator and our good friend, Ted Kennedy. Thank you.
Tommy Menino. Thanks very much. Tommy Menino. Let's hear it for Tommy. One of the best mayors, not only of Massachusetts, but of our country. We love Boston, and we love you, Tommy and Angela. Thank you so much for being a part of tonight. Our very special guest. We had a wonderful rally down in Fall River, and I said to our very special guest today, I said, you can travel up in the state of Washington and Oregon as you did last week. You can campaign down in Texas, where you were at 5:30 this morning. You can travel the length and breadth of this country, but you'll never get a better reception than in Massachusetts. You'll never get a better reception than in Massachusetts. Mr. President, Mr. President, you may be. You may be from Hope, Arkansas, but this is Clinton country, and we're proud of it. And the reason it is because you have stood for the values that make the greatest difference to the people all over our Commonwealth. You stand for working families. You understand the importance of education. You're committed to decent health care. You know the power and the importance of the environment. you care for your senior citizens, and you care for communities that are going to be safe for all the citizens. I want you to know that we know how you have stood there and been firm over these past years. And the man that has been standing in the United States Senate right there with you is the man right down sitting next to you, my friend, my colleague, the current senator from the state of Massachusetts, John Kerry. There's more to come, John. There's more to come. There's more to come. I want to know from everyone in Massachusetts, just remember this. November 5th is the day. Massachusetts is the state. Bill Clinton, John Kerry, our candidates. Are you going to be there? Are you going to stand for? Are you going to give John Kerry?
How about our senior Senator Ted Kennedy? He got wound up. Ted Kennedy got wound up this morning in Fall River, and he hasn't stopped since. The truth is that you and many others wound him up in 1994, and he hasn't stopped since. Mr. President, thank you for coming to Boston, and thank you for honoring Massachusetts. Who would have thought that 30 years ago we might have thought we would all be here listening to these same people at a political rally, and everybody kept their clothes on. Unbelievable. What an extraordinary group of friends who have crisscrossed my life, both political and personal. And I thank all of them, remarkably gifted and talented performers, for taking the time to come here tonight and share their gifts with all of us. Each of them is special and connected to our state in their own way. Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Stephen Stills has been part of my efforts before, and David Crosby and Graham Nash. They don't probably remember this, but years ago when I first came back from Vietnam and we were working to create outreach centers and recognize post-Vietnam stress syndrome and to help deal with the problems of veterans who were fighting alcohol and drug abuse. Crosby, Stills, and Nash were among those groups who were there even then, singing their songs and lending their talent to help other people, and I'm grateful to them for being part of this tonight. And Carly Simon, who truly hates to stand up in front of live audiences, even though she is one of the most gifted and extraordinary singers in America, took her time to come tonight. We think of her as the soul, not only of good music, but of Martha's Vineyard, and we're happy that she was here. Joe Walsh, who, as you know, sings with Don and the Eagles, his extraordinary talent on the guitar and singing tonight, and Don Henley, who is particularly special to Massachusetts. And Don, on behalf of all of us in this state that is the home of Henry David Thoreau, thank you for caring about Thoreau, and thank you for helping to save Walden Woods. Extraordinary. Whoopi Goldberg, who Whoopi, who promised me tonight she wasn't going to misbehave, and oh, but we wish she had. But Whoopi, who never, ever forgets the fight for justice and for racial harmony and for people who are left behind but shouldn't be. Whoopi, thank you for your contributions. And Chris Reeve. Chris has still left a lump in my throat and tears in my eyes. He is a remarkably courageous, extraordinary human being. And I'll tell you, Mr. President, I will always be grateful, as Chris and others will be, when they walk again, because you have committed more money to that research, which is so important. Thank you. And Peter, Paul, and Mary, who Peter, Paul, and Mary, who are no strangers to the extended Kerry family, who I met on the steps of the Capitol in 1971 when we were all there to try to stop a war in Vietnam. And the first time I saw them, I wasn't able to meet them. I was an undergraduate at college, and I just bought a ticket and went and listened. Mr. President, I think we have representatives from all of Massachusetts' 136 colleges and universities here tonight. And I will have more to say about them in a minute. But I want to thank Peter, Paul, and Mary. They taught us how to march in the 1960s. And I cut my teeth on their music as we were part of the Mississippi voter registration drive, part of the civil rights movement, the peace movement, the women's movement, the environmental movement. And now they are still marching, and so are we. I want to thank the kids from the Timothy School whose special spirit tells us a lot about the possibilities and what we can do with our schools. And I'm proud that our mayor, Tom Menino, has made the commitment to be measured by what he does with our schools. Mr. Mayor, thank you for your leadership and for what you do. And I ask you all to recognize those people closest to me who sustain me and are the most important, not only in my life, but who happen to also be the best campaigners in this campaign. My wife, Teresa Hines, my daughters, please stand up. My daughters, Alexandra and Vanessa, my stepson, Christopher, Did I hear the word Harvard? I'm going to refrain. If I start naming schools, we're all in trouble. Let me share. My friends, I want to share with you a personal sense. I want to share with you a personal sense in this intimate hall of what this campaign is really about, why I'm running, and what matters to all of us. This campaign is not about John Kerry or just Bill Weld. It's not about just Bill Clinton or Bob Dole. It's not, as I think Mary said earlier, a contest. This is about where we are going in this short span of time that we are given to struggle here on this planet and make a difference. And that struggle has been part of my personal and political life since I was a kid. I want to continue that struggle because we still have a journey to travel together. And there are differences between us. Differences between someone who runs away from his party and tries to pretend he's like the other party, and my pride in calling myself a Democrat and running as one with Bill Clinton. And the differences between Bill Weld and John Kerry are the differences between Bill Clinton, Ted Kennedy, and Bob Dole and Newt Gingrich and the agenda in Washington. This is a competition between competing visions for where we go as we march across that bridge that the president defined so clearly into the 21st century. My opponent doesn't believe that workers like those at ComGas who were locked out, he doesn't believe that if they're ready to report for work and they want to go to work, that they ought to be permitted when they're locked out to get unemployment compensation. I do believe they deserve that compensation. My opponent doesn't believe that kids who don't have health care, 165,000 of them in our state, he doesn't believe that they ought to get that health care even if it's paid by cigarette tax. I believe it's high time we had leaders in America who understand that kids deserve health care. And I believe we ought to be grateful for a president who understands that cigarettes are worse for people than cigarette taxes. Mr. President, my opponent doesn't even believe that people who work a full day and a full week ought to earn the right to a full day's wage and get more than 3/4 the level of poverty. Under Ted Kennedy's leadership and our efforts in the United States Senate and the President's signature, we not only proved that we believe something different, we gave people in this country a raise in the minimum wage. My friends, the difference is as clear as can be. My opponent supports not just the $245 billion tax break, that most of which went to the wealthy, that came at the expense of Medicare and education and the environment and housing. He now wants to join Bob Dole and say double or nothing, $550,000. And I say no. Bill Clinton says no. Ted Kennedy says no. Not a dime to those who have made out in the 1980s to 90s until the working people, the average person, gets their break. That is, those are some of the differences in this race. Another huge difference is, and it's worth going to the polls for on November 5th, his first vote, if he were to go to Washington, would be for Trent Lott, Don Nichols, Larry Craig, Strom Thurmond, Al D'Amato, Jesse Helms. My first vote will be for the Democratic Majority Leader, Tom Daschle, and for Ted Kennedy to be chairman of the Labor and Human Resources Committee. I want to thank so many people for tonight. So many of you who have fought hard to sell the tickets, raise the money, be part of this great evening in Boston, a moment of history which has not seen a president in either the Fleet Center or the Garden for a political rally since President. So I feel like a kid who's been liberated from exam week. I'm ready to get out there, and Massachusetts, I'm going to be in your face from the Berkshires to Fall River to Lowell to New Bedford, all over the course of this state. And Mr. President, you have done an extraordinary job of giving us a record to run on. 10.5 million jobs created, low interest rates, low unemployment, low inflation. A record 4 straight years of deficit reduction, the first time you can say that since the Civil War. But as I introduce this leader of our nation, I simply want to share with you one thought that occurred to me as I listened to the music tonight. That was the music to which we went to war and came back from war. And it was the music to which we marched in an effort to end the war. And it reminded me that I came back from Vietnam the first time the very night that Robert Kennedy was killed. And the first sounds I heard on the radio as we approached the coastline were the sounds of the Ambassador Hotel. And the next morning I got off that ship and spent the weekend, as most of America did, transfixed, trying to figure out why and make a reason out of it. Robert Kennedy gave one of the great speeches of American politics in Kansas in 1968. And he said to people then, he talked about how we measure what we do in public life. He talked about how you measure the gross domestic product, as it was then called, of this country. He said we measure it many ways. The carnage in our streets, the locks on our doors, the police who come to arrest people, the urban sprawl that tears down our forests. He measured it even by Whitman's rifle and Speck's knife. But what we don't measure, he said, what we don't allow for, is the quality of our kids' education, the health of our children, the joy of their play. We measure neither the integrity of our public officials nor the quality of our public debate. We measure neither our wit nor our wisdom, neither our courage nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to country. And in the end, he said, we measure everything except that which makes life worth living. And it tells us everything about America except why we are most proud of being Americans. I'm in politics to get us back to that kind of measurement, and so is President Bill Clinton. This president has stood up for a vision for the future. He wants to build that bridge to the 21st century. He wants to guarantee that no child, no person will be left behind. He wants to bring this nation together around ideals and ideas and a vision. My friends, that is a politics worth fighting for and fighting about. And I am privileged to introduce to you tonight the man who will be the first president of the 21st century, President William Jefferson Clinton.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mr. President, you have clearly won the hearts of Boston and of Massachusetts, but we want you to win what 4 hockey teams vie for here every year in a famous tournament, and we want you to try some of Boston's best food. So I want to present you, sir, with a bean pot that contains the best of Boston, with the understanding that this is better than McDonald's.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. You know, thank you. 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 You know, I just was looking at Senator Kerry give his speech. Gives me a bean pot. I mean, whoever said he didn't have a sense of humor, do you believe that Governor Well would have the guts to stand up here and say he couldn't believe that we had all those people from the 60s playing and everybody kept their clothes on? Next thing you know, John Kerry will be doing the Macarena with Al Gore. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the warm and wonderful reception you have given me tonight. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here for John Kerry, who richly deserves your support for re-election because he has been fighting for your future, for the future of Massachusetts and the future of the United States for a very long time, and he has consistently been on the right side of that future. You know, I remember in 1993, when we had a stagnant economy and high unemployment, and the country was dividing economically and socially, and people were becoming more and more cynical, and I put an economic plan forward to the Congress, and not a single person in the other party voted for it, and they all tried to terrify our side and say, oh, this is a terrible plan, it will raise the deficit, it will increase unemployment, will bankrupt the country. Well, John Kerry and Senator Ted Kennedy stood with the president, and now we know. 10.5 million jobs later, we know that John Kerry was right and they were wrong. I remember in 1994, with after crime had bedeviled so many of our communities, and people in Washington had talked about the need for a crime bill for 6 years, and I had run on the promise of putting 100,000 more police officers on our streets to prevent crime, to make our streets, our schools, our neighborhoods safer. I remember that the leaders of the other party said, oh, this is a terrible thing, and they won a lot of their elections in '94 by convincing hunters in places like my home state they'd lose their guns. But John Kerry stood firm, and we got that 100,000 police. We got the Brady bill. We got the assault weapons ban. And this is a safer country with 4 years of declining crime. Thank you, John Kerry, for being on the right side of history. When Christopher Reeve spoke tonight, reminded me so clearly of everything he said at a time when we were faced last year with a budget, take it or leave it, or we'll shut the government down, that cut education, cut the environment, cut our investments in research and technology, weakened our commitments through Medicare and Medicaid. I said no, and so did Senator Kennedy, and so did John Kerry. And we did get more for medical research because he asked for more for medical research in the spinal cord area. And let me tell you, folks, lest you think that's a pipe dream, just a few days before Christopher Reeve spoke at the Democratic National Convention, for the first time ever, a laboratory animal with its spine completely severed got movement back in its lower limbs because of a nerve transplant to the spine. We are going to solve that problem and many others if we keep people like John Kerry, who are on the right side of history. He deserves your support. And I can't let this moment go without saying, after all the fights we had over the budget over the last 2 years, it was a wonderful thing to see in the last few weeks, after the American people made their voices heard, Senator Kennedy taking the lead and passing a health care reform bill he's worked on for years that says you can't be denied insurance anymore if you change jobs or if someone in your family has been sick. 25 million Americans will be better off because of that. And that's on the right side of history. Tuesday, October 1st, 10 million Americans will get a pay raise when the minimum wage goes into effect because Senator Kennedy worked and Senator Kerry helped him, and we got a minimum wage increase. It was the right thing to do. Well, we've been here a long time, and I know you want to go home, and I don't want to take a lot of your time, but I want to say something, especially to the young people here tonight. I want to tell you something about being on the right side of history. And I want you to think about it seriously, just for a minute. Once in a generation or so, our people in our long march of democracy have been confronted with a set of decisions that are so profound that they will affect how we live and how we relate to each other and the rest of the world for a very long time. This is that sort of time. We are being asked, basically because of the differences between ourselves and our opponents, to decide two fundamental questions about what we're going to be like when we go roaring into the 21st century. No matter what happens, those of us that are well prepared, especially our young people, will have more chances to live out our dreams than any generation of Americans has ever had. But the two great questions we have to face that will shape what we are as a country and what we look like 50 years from now are, number one, do we believe that we have to build a bridge to the future that every American is given the ability to walk across? I think the answer to that is yes. But not everybody does. Whether you believe that or not determines how you answer questions like whether you're for the Family and Medical Leave Act, whether you believe it should be preserved and expanded so that people can succeed at home and at work. Whether you believe that or not depends upon whether you think we should be providing an opportunity for every person who wants to go to college to go through tax credits and tax deductions and savings programs. I believe we should, and John Kerry believes we should, and that is the right side of history. The other great question we have to face is whether this incredible mosaic of diversity that is America, all the differences that you can see here just by looking around this great hall tonight, will be a source of strength and sustenance to us that will add to our prosperity and more to the richness and quality of our lives, or whether we will be bedeviled, divided, and weakened by the differences among us. Look all around the world today. How much of your time as president do I have to spend? From the Middle East to Northern Ireland to Bosnia to Rwanda and Burundi to so many other places around the world, how much time trying to get people to stop defining their lives in terms of who they can hate, whom they can look down upon because they are different, because of race or religion or region or gender or tribe. It is wrong. It is wrong. And we have to decide whether we are going to beat the odds. These are the two great questions. I don't like bumper stickers much, but the truth is, it's pretty good to say. The question is, are we going to build a bridge to the future or try to reach back to the past? I think you know the answer to that. You can also say, as my opponent did in all candor and completely honestly, when he spoke at the Republican convention, he said he really thought that the First Lady was wrong, that we were better off being left to ourselves and our families to make our way. But I think she was right. I believe it takes a village to make the most of all of our lives. And I believe that you think that too. And so I ask those of you, especially those of you who are young. Some of you may have indulged all of us who were singing our old songs here tonight. Some of you now know them as well as we do and love them as well. But all of you, I ask you to think about this. This great choice is going to affect how you live. Those of you who have most of your tomorrows in front of you, this choice will affect them because of the profound changes going on in our country and in our world. Whether we decide to build that bridge to the future that enables everyone to make the most of their own lives, whether we decide to stay with the idea that we are a village and we have to respect one another and bond together and be stronger and richer because of our differences, these things will determine what America looks like when we cross the bridge to the 21st century, when our children are our age, and in 100 years when people write back their histories about what we did in our time. And do not underestimate the weight of this decision. This is a huge decision. These are big questions. They will define the United States of America for a long time to come. This is a decision that comes along once in a generation, maybe once every 50 years. Think how different the world would have been when the Founding Fathers in Massachusetts and the other 12 states had made the other decision they were asked to make. That is, don't make this one country, make this a club of 13 different states. Just sort of a social organization. You can come and go as you please. I wouldn't be here because there would never have been a Louisiana Purchase and I wouldn't be an American. Think how different this country would be if Abraham Lincoln had not been president when the state said, well, hey, we formed this country, we got the right to get out. And Abraham Lincoln said, I don't think so. I don't think so. And he was willing to give 500,000 lives, including his own life, to keep this country together. And then to face the next question, well, if we're going to stay together, don't we have to quit lying about who we are? How can we have a Constitution that says all of us are created equal and keep slavery? So we got to get rid of that. Think how different this country would be if we hadn't made that decision 130-odd years ago. Think how different. Would all the other immigrants be here today? Would this place look like it does today? I don't think so. Think how different this country would have been when Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson had to manage our transition from being a rural country of small farmers to an urban country of great cities like this one, which Mayor Menino leads so well today. Think how different it would have been if they had answered these questions differently. They had to say, okay, now we're an industrial country. Are we going to let a few monopolies run out all the small business people, or are we going to preserve free enterprise? They voted for free enterprise. Are we going to let these big companies destroy our natural heritage? Or are we going to preserve things like the Grand Canyon and other national parks and keep something for all generations to come? Are we going to let our children work 70 hours a week in coal mines and sweatshops as they were doing then? Or are we going to stop that and give our children their childhoods back and their education? Think how different America would be if we had answered those questions differently. These are the questions that are being asked of you and your generation. These are the kinds of questions that we are facing. When you ask which budget do you want, it's really about what kind of people are we? Are we going together, respecting our differences, building a bridge? Or are we going to say it's every person for himself? I wish you well. I believe I know the answer. And I ask those of you who are young, you have 38 days. John Kerry has earned the right to be re-elected senator from Massachusetts because he's been on the side of your future. On the side of your future. You do not have to believe one bad thing personally about his opponent. You do not have to make this a negative race at all. All you have to do is to look at the fundamental choices before you. And for those of you who are young, especially, I say, imagine in your mind what you want this country to be like in 4 years when we go roaring into a new century and a new millennium. What you want our country to be like when your own children are your age. What do you want the history of America to be 100 years from now? What will they say about what we did now? I hope they'll say, America decided it takes a village, and we're going to build a bridge to the 21st century that we can all walk across. Thank you. God bless you. Bear down and bring home the victory for us. Thank you.